Welcome back to the Evolve Sales Leader, recorded live Friday, right here on LinkedIn from Overpass Studios every week. I'm Jonathan Fisher. It's always been tough to find and retain top talent, and with the effects of the so-called Great Resignation still reverberating, it's tougher than ever. Well, imagine if you had a tested, proven way to attract the best people and get them excited to stay and work with you for years to come. Does such a silver bullet exist? Our guest today says yes. Returning once again to the Evolve Sales Leader is John Livesay.
Hey, Jonathan.
Great to have you. John's a 4-time best-selling author. He's a highly sought-after coach and keynote speaker. He's a specialist in helping corporations and professionals level up their performance using the power of storytelling. By the end of our conversation today, John will have shared with us the most important ways that leaders need to work with HR to recruit and keep top talent, the 3 types of stories leaders must have in their toolbox to make their job offers irresistible, a step-by-step template you can use to put these stories together, and some tips and best practices on implementing all of this into your recruiting and HR to achieve exponential results. John, we're making a big promise today. Are you going to be good for that, brother?
I love big promises. I love big, hairy, audacious goals for the new year, and I love making big promises that you can keep.
My man. Well, that's why we love you. And that's why one of the reasons among many why you are our #1 top podcast of the year this last year.
Wow.
Congratulations once again.
What an honor. I'm very touched and thrilled about that. Thank you.
Well, I trust this won't be the last time either that we have you on our show, John. And just a quick reminder to our live audience, this is live. Please go ahead and begin putting your questions into the chat. We're going to have a Q&A at the end so you can get answers right here with our guest at the end of the show. So go ahead and get started. Don't wait. All right. So, John, just kind of starting off a little bit on this topic of the show of recruiting top talent. You work with corporations all the time. How do you read the current job market?
Well, this has been a very interesting time, to say the least. During the pandemic, a lot of companies were having to lay people off. And I think we saw it in the airline industry. They realized they laid too many people off now that things are back. And then even if companies were not laying people off, they had to adapt to them working from home at the same time their children were at home. That's never happened before. And it really accelerated remote work. It was sort of starting off as a trend. Maybe on Fridays, we let you work from home. But the concept of productivity was really in question. And what still is very much in question is, do you need to be seen in an office every day in order to get promoted? Mm-hmm. So this hybrid work environment is now the new norm. And a lot of companies are afraid to mandate that everybody must return to the office every day, that they'll lose a lot of good people. And yet they have this expensive office space that's only being used Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to a certain capacity. So that's created a lot of uncertainty, and companies that have never really had to recruit that strongly, if they're the leader in their category, are now suddenly faced with a shortage of people. So it's this perfect storm of, how do we navigate this? And more importantly, how do we fill these jobs that we need qualified people for? We're not talking entry-level jobs at restaurants. We're talking architects, lawyers, professionals the companies are struggling to find the right worker.
Well, in this movement to either a hybrid model forever or a distributed model, that's creating a lot of tumult. What about this Great Resignation thing? Are we starting to see the end of that? Is that an ongoing trend as well?
Depends what age group you're talking to. I think, people who've got a mortgage and children and things like that are a little less likely than somebody younger who might say, I'm only planning to be at any job 3 years max. I don't really want to climb a corporate ladder. I want some freedom. The thing that's still going on is quiet quitting, where you don't quit, but you're really not giving it everything you got. So that's also a separate problem from filling in open slots that you need filled in order to be, productive. So I think companies now are having to really flip the script to make their place a fit. People are looking at, what's the cultural issues? Does it match my personal issues and beliefs around diversity and sustainability? There's so much more to companies getting top talent than just here's the salary, here's the benefits.
Well, this is it. Everyone has to up their game to not just attract but keep people around. Of course, we used to call that greener pasture syndrome. A lot of times, folks find out the pasture is no greener at the new place than it was where they left, right?
Yeah.
But the lesson still remains that as hiring managers, we need to have a way to up our game. Now, it's interesting. You're known as the pitch whisperer. You're known about integrating the power of story. Now, typically, the application for this is closing more deals. You're dealing with
Right.
sales professionals, business development people. How in the world did you get pulled over into the recruiting side of this whole thing?
Well, a lot of my clients are in the real estate business and in the architecture business. And one of the real estate companies that engaged me to come speak on the power of storytelling to help their team sell more homes, get more listings, has now engaged me to come back next year and talk about how to use storytelling to recruit the top 5% that are working at competitors to come work at their company. And in the real estate world, that's a little tricky because, there's only so much you can do in terms of commissions that you give somebody and how big their office is and the support they get. So it's the people who are doing really well typically are taken care of and don't really need to move over. But if you tell a good story, but the people typically might be great at selling houses, but they're not really great at selling themselves as a leader or having anything ready to go of other people that have made the move and how happy their life is. And the same is true of architects. The biggest firms never used to have to really recruit that much. They were always getting resumes from graduates in other companies. And now they're so busy, they've got all these open slots that they're having to adjust their criteria for who they hire in terms of experience, but also really explain the company's vision and culture to people so that they feel happy that they're working in a place that matches their values.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and when you're dealing with top people, it's always competitive. The headhunter calls come if you're good at something. A
Yes.
lot of our audience is going to be in the tech space, B2B services space. That's definitely true in that world. Do you feel like this is something that can also forestall that? Like, they're hearing messages all the time. You can't control that. Is it, if you have your story act together the way that you kind of preach that message, is that something that can help out?
Yes. When you tell a great story, not just a good story, it's memorable and magnetic. And it also is something that people can remember and repeat and become your brand ambassadors.
Hmm.
So if you've got people out there talking about how great it is to work here, and now, it used to be Google would give you free food, and that was new and cool. And everyone wants to work at Google. Now that's kind of table stakes at a lot of tech companies. And so it has to be something more than that.
Well, and when it comes to something more than that, you're let's just circle it right back. We're talking about the story that you have.
Mm.
So, what are some of the before and after that you've seen with this? I mean, and again, you're just now maybe implementing this, moving from a sales application to a recruiting application. But could you give us some examples of before and after that you're beginning to see?
Sure. Let's go back to the real estate example. They've always been recruiting the top talent at their competitors to come work here, but they didn't really have a system in place. It would just be, let's have lunch and, kind of casually talk about what it's like to work here versus where you are. Or if you're ever unhappy, we'd love to talk with you. There wasn't any formal funnel or formal way to do it. Um, and again, a lot of people don't realize the importance of their own story of origin in this situation. They don't know what a story of origin is as it applies to becoming a leader. Maybe you have your story of origin of how you got into real estate or architecture or tech or whatever it is you do. But if you're now promoted and managing an office or a region, you need a story of origin of what inspired you to become a leader, what kind of leader you want to be, who are other leaders that inspire you, what people have said to you about why they like you and your leadership style. Having that in a structured story really is what pulls people in to even want to have the conversation with you.
Well, and is it a sales pitch when you're recruiting? Do
Oh,
you feel like
yes.
that makes
Yeah.
sense?
It's a total sales pitch. Let's not kid ourselves. You are selling yourself, the company, and the opportunity, and in that order. And most people forget the first two steps, Jonathan, and jump right to the opportunity. And that's the
Yeah.
biggest mistake I see happening time and time again.
That's
You
like
know, they
selling
start,
the features of your product before you've established a need, I suppose, right?
yes, exactly. It's like, oh, you can make a lot more money here. It's like, wait a minute. You know, you got to date me a little bit,
Yeah.
right? You know,
That may not
nobody
may not be what matters most to that person either.
exactly. Um, that, you know, I think we've seen people make this mistake on LinkedIn. Oh, let's connect. And then they ask you to buy something. You know, there's a process. And I have a ladder about going from invisible to irresistible
Hmm.
that really applies to selling anything, including getting top people to come work for you.
Love it.
Um, it's, I can go over those rungs really quickly if you'd like.
Yeah, I was going to ask you next story. What you said, there's 3 types of story that the leader needs. So let's
Yes,
hit us with those just one after the other first, if you would, and then we'll
sure.
dive deep on each.
It's the story of origin, as I mentioned. Then it's the company story. And here's where people make the mistake of talking about how long you've been in business and how many offices you have. That's not a story, that's facts. And then it's turning a case study of another employee that came from a competitor to what their life is like now, not just in the professional part, but in the personal part. Maybe they have more free time. Maybe they're not missing their kids' sporting or musical events. So your story as a leader, the company's story as values in action, and finally, a case story of another employee. Because remember, when you tell a story that other people see themselves in, they want to go on that journey with you.
Well, that makes all the sense in the world. I mean, we say that in sales, but in truth, it applies that much more when you're talking about recruiting. So, a personal story of origin, and then the company story, and then I think you also mentioned about having case stories
Yes.
from other employees. So let's break those down a little bit. So, personal story of origin. I mean, how personal are we talking here? Like, what's that actually look like?
Well, it's like a journalist, the who, what, where, when.
Mm-hmm.
When I got into business, the one of my mentors and the person that really inspired me was someone named Tim Sanders, who wrote Love is the Killer App and went on to write many other books. And he's also a sales keynote speaker. And one of the things I love most about Tim is he's so heart-centered as well as data-centered. And he's combined both. And so if I have that as a little story of origin of someone who inspired me, mentored me, wrote the foreword to one of my books, that gives people a sense of, oh, this is who you are like. This is who you're emulating.
Hmm.
So you don't, in my fortunate case, I've met Tim Sanders several times, but some other people, maybe you just are inspired by Abraham Lincoln or whoever. I love that kind of leadership. Just have some story of origin of, Maya Angelou really inspired me with her poetry. And that's kind of a leader I aspire to be, making people feel seen and heard, and I care about how my people feel, because that's one
Hmm.
of her great quotes. So that's what I mean by having that story of origin that people go, I love Maya Angelou too, or I love Brene Brown too, whatever it is
Yeah.
that you go, I get a sense of who you are as a person and a brand.
Well, it sounds like you're not recommending that I just spit out a list of perceived accomplishments or whatever
No,
great things I think I've done or whatever plaques I have
no,
on my wall.
no. Again, it's not about you. It's
Hmm.
only about you in terms of, does this person want to work with you? And what does that vibe feel like? Right. And it's like, yeah, I'm assuming you have whatever qualifications you need to be in this position, but so does my existing boss. So why do I need to? I'm not going to change jobs because you had a higher GPA for your MBA than my boss did, right?
Hmm.
That's not relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think this is a place where ego can maybe not serve one well in leadership?
Yes. Ego never serves you well in any kind of sales, right? I always tell people, when you tell a story, even if it's your own story of origin, you're technically not even the hero of that story.
Hmm.
In my case, Tim Sanders is the hero who inspired me. And I give specific things that he said and done that made me want to go on that journey and aspire to be as a good a leader as he is.
Hmm.
So having some other frame of work, so it's not just me. And so now that's, the values and virtues, it could be, I'm inspired by Socrates, and being stoic and that philosophy. It doesn't matter
Hmm.
who or what it is. but it's something bigger than you that makes your story of origin. The reason I got into leadership in the first place was it wasn't enough for me to just be making money. I wanted to train and inspire other people and help them get to be successful. Those kinds of comments are what pull people in.
I think that sounds like there might be a sound of a sigh of relief on the part of some listeners that they don't have to talk about themselves. Some of us don't like to do that.
No.
It's awkward anyway.
Right.
So it's kind of a relief that, hey, you can actually tell a compelling personal story by sharing who are your inspirations. I love that.
Yes.
So then what's the company story about?
Okay, so one of my favorite company stories is Tom Shoes, because most people have heard of it. You buy a pair of shoes and, they donate a pair to a third world country and give it to children, typically. And, having listened to the founder talk about that whole experience after they did the very first experience, he was actually having trouble getting Nordstrom's to carry the line. They were just talking about the shoes. And they said, we also have this charity thing, but it really wasn't flushed out. There wasn't a story. But after the first time they did that, he then went back to, I believe it was Venezuela, and he was on a bus with a translator, and he saw this woman running alongside the bus with 3 children who had the shoes on. But the mother was crying, and he was like, why is she crying? They have the shoes. He goes, I don't know. I'll find out. I'll ask her and translate it. Turns out she had brought the worn out dress shoe of a man, and said that before he came and gave her boys shoes, those boys had to put their feet into the man's shoe. And of course it was way too big. So they actually had to shuffle, and it took them much longer than their friends to even get to school, then shuffle all the way home. And then the next day, the next brother got it. And the third day, the next brother got it. So A, it took them forever to get to school. And B, they only got to go to school 1 out of every 3 days. Now they get to run with their friends and go to school, and they're going every day. He told that story to the Nordstrom buyer, and she, tear in her eyes, she's like, I want all the shoes. That's the company values in action. We have a sense of that impact.
That's really powerful. So again, it's not about we're such a great company. It's that we're doing something that's really worthwhile and is compelling to be a part of. It sounds like.
Exactly.
So then you talk about using case stories of other employees. And before we get into that, I want to mention, hey, if you're trying to recruit top people, how about getting into a pool of people where everyone's raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm ready to work? Overpass.com allows you to do just that. Go create a free account on Overpass.com. If you are a hiring manager in any kind of company, create a job post. It's free to do it, and instantly you'll have dozens of highly qualified people raising their hand to be considered who have great qualifications. You can listen to sound bites of their voices on the phone. You can see their CVs. You can quickly interview and hire people in just days at a very low cost, very high value. Overpass.com. We're very proud that our show is powered by Overpass here on the Evolve Sales Leader. So, John, when we are talking stories, we got a personal story going on. We got a company story going on. I guess it does make logical sense. We need to know a little bit what's going on with other employees. Yes. Sounds like it could be tricky to me, though. So dive in, if you would. How do we define this, and how do we get those stories?
Well, I think really savvy employees have always taken a little initiative and talked to people at a potential job that they're thinking of working at, and had some coffee or one-on-ones with them. Like, what's it really like to work here? What's your favorite part? What's your least favorite part? And getting a sense of the culture. But if you're the person, in that interview role and you're trying to recruit some top talent to come over, let's just give a mock-up example. So let's say Berkshire Hathaway Home Services is trying to recruit somebody from Sotheby's. And 6 months ago, somebody, Sally, left Sotheby's to come work at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. And so they've had her now there for the last 6 months. And Sally is married, a mother of 2, and she just felt like she was working 24/7 at Sotheby's and had no time for her family or herself. And she also didn't feel like she had a lot of support in getting into the world of really affluent buyers. And so one of the things that Berkshire Hathaway prides themselves on is a work-life balance. And, you can work 24/7 if you want to, but they don't encourage it. And they also have a really unique system where they will give homeowners an accurate analysis of what their home or homes around the world are worth when they meet with their financial planners and accountants. And it elevates the real estate agent from just being seen as a transaction to being seen as equivalent to a financial planner and the CPA. And those little techniques that they have and systems in place for that help generate really upscale leads for that. And so if you tell that story of now Sally's been with us 6 months by using our system of doing these free analysis of what your homes are worth for your annual meetings with your financial planners, she's getting higher price point listings. She's working fewer hours, making more money, and able to go see her daughter perform ballet once a month, whereas before she would be missing those because she'd be at a closing or whatever. So that little story, if you have another agent that happens to be like Sally, she's also a mom, you want to have your brain be like a jukebox or a playlist. You have multiple case stories to go depending on who you're talking to. Again, we want another woman, let's say Mary, to see herself and, God, Sally sounds a lot like me.
Yeah.
I want Sally's outcome.
Getting some social proof working to sell your opportunity.
Yes.
So these are really powerful insights. I guess the first place my mind goes as a leader myself is, how do I implement on this? Like, how do I begin to put these stories together? Can you give us a recipe book we can follow?
Sure. A good story has 3 C's. It needs to be clear, concise, and compelling. The first C is if you confuse people and start using a bunch of internal acronyms that your company has that others don't, we're like, I'm confused, I'm out. The second is it needs to be concise so that people can remember that story and repeat it. Oh, so let's say back in that example I was talking about, if we're trying to get Mary to come over like Sally did, Mary has to remember Sally's story and repeat it to her husband if she's going to make a big change, like changing companies. And then finally, it has to be compelling. There has to be some heart-centered thing. It can't just be she's making more money, but no, it's that. And she's got time back. She's now going to Pilates once a week. She's seeing her kids perform. She's got her life back and making more money. So it's the combination. Clear, concise, and compelling is the checklist you have when you say, okay, I know I need 3 stories now, and I need to practice each one of those stories to my friends and coworkers and say, was it clear? Any confusion there? Is it concise enough that you think you could remember it? And more importantly, did it make you feel anything?
That's good. And do you think this is something the leader needs to tackle him or herself? Is this something that can be done collaboratively? What are your recommendations on that?
Well, one of the methodologies I have is giving you the structure to make those case stories, and I'll get to that in a second. But I am a big believer in having accountability partners, and I say tackle each one once a week. So this week, I'm going to really hone in on my story of origin. Next week, it's the company story, and everybody needs to be involved in that. Let's all get on the same songbook of what we're saying our company story is. And then the third week will be case stories. And maybe your colleague has a case story of the kind of employee that you haven't managed yet, but you could use that case story depending on who the person is you're trying to get to come over. So you want to have a database of where all these stories live. I've had a client put it on a repository map where you click on each state and up pops the stories. It could just be a Google Drive. But when you go into the case story in particular, it's got 4 parts: the exposition, the who, what, where, when. So in this case, we know Sally, she's approximately this old, she's married, 2 kids. I would get into even more detail, like her kids are this age, she lives in, Austin, all that good stuff. And then what the problems are. You got to describe, Sally was making a lot of money, but she was burning out. And really, it was affecting her personal life, her health. And then the solution was coming over here. And, not only we have a new way of attracting top buyers in that income level, and you go into a little bit of what the solution is, as I described, how they, do the analysis of the homes, and then the resolution. What is life like for her now that she's been here 6 months? Not only making more money, but happier, healthier, all that good stuff.
And then would you kind of just go through and just look through the current team, and we have this sort of demographic, and we have this sort of story, and just try to have, is there sort of a critical mass, or is there a set of 3 or 5 types that you would generalize, that you can generalize in terms of building these?
All the sales VPs and chief revenue officers I've all talked to, they have a good sense. Our top producing 20% of our top producing salespeople that sometimes produce as much as 80% of our revenue, we know who that is. We know their psychographics, demographics, and that's who we want to get to come here because they fit in well into this culture. And so start with those case stories
Hmm.
and then target those people at other places that see themselves in those stories. So you bring in top producers. And just because someone's a top producer at one place doesn't mean they will be a top producer somewhere else. Odds are they will, but you got to really still screen for culture fit and other things.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we know the story types, we know what they are. We've got a good recipe book to follow to put these together. Talk to us about implementing now. What are my best practices to incorporate this to my daily recruiting?
Well, I think you first have to really go in saying, what's my checklist? Is it clear, concise, and compelling? Do I have 3 stories? Who's the person I'm recruiting? Do I have a case story that fits them? And, Arthur Ashe, the famous tennis pro, said the key to success is confidence, and the key to confidence is preparation. So the number one thing on any kind of sales call, and this is a sales call when you're recruiting top talent, is prepare. Don't go, I'll just wing it. I think I know the story of so-and-so. And if you haven't practiced it and then you kind of stumble through it and it's not clear, concise, and compelling, it all just like a cake that falls flat, you know? So
Yeah,
that's,
right.
organize it, practice it, prepare like an athlete.
And who's telling the story? Does it have like I'm thinking of different ways. Like here's where my mind goes. For example, I could think of telling these stories in little videos,
Mm-hmm.
and then giving these to maybe some other people in the organization to use, or that's part of our regular email follow up with recruiting.
Nice.
Like, can you give us some tactical inputs on that?
Well, I definitely think the company story should be on the website.
Hmm.
Well, on the about page.
Hmm.
It should be on the LinkedIn profile. And it should feature, if you're promoting diversity, let's make sure we're showing that in the people that are in that video. That's very tactical. If you're all about sustainability, we need to see LEED certified stuff. We need to see people who care about sustainability and why, a little testimonial of why they care about the planet, climate, whatever, and how this company fits those values. But there's no substitute for that one-on-one communication. I don't think anyone's going to change jobs, especially if they're a top producer, based on videos. But it doesn't hurt for you to have your story of origin on your own LinkedIn profile under the About page. LinkedIn is so great in terms of your ability to upload videos. I have several videos on my profile as a sales keynote speaker. So the story of origin and the company story, definitely videos. But in terms of those customized case stories, I would save those for in person.
Yeah, like that's kind of the final elements to motivate them, let them really see themselves in the role, perhaps.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, as usual, John, the conversation's blown by, chock full of value. It's been a
Good.
fun ride. Our audience, hey, if you've got a few more questions, shove them in the chat real quick. We're going to jump over to Q&A here in a moment. But before we do that, John, you've got a really neat offer. We can see the title behind you there of your latest book, which is The Sales in the Tail, a really great best-selling book. What is your special offer? Tell us about that.
If you take out your phone and text the word pitch, PITCH, to 66866, I send you the first chapter of the book for free. It's a business fable about the story of storytelling and how somebody was stuck in a slump and how they got out of it. And then all of the templates I described here are in the back for you to start crafting your own stories.
Well, and if you agree with the premise that recruiting is a sales pitch, hey, recruiters, get out here and grab yourself this first chapter, and you'll probably end up getting the book as well. Great stuff. John, you're a great friend of the channel, and so I thank you for sharing those insights. Let's move over to Q&A and see what we've got here into some good questions.
Sure.
Here's one coming from Michael Glansman. He's asking, is organizational vision or job design benefits more critical when building this sales pitch?
If you mean organizational vision, telling the company story and showing those values in action, like I mentioned, Tom's shoes, then yes. I think the criteria for people, especially top producers, people with a lot of experience today, is much more than just salary and benefits. So your ability to turn that into a story that they care about and would be proud to say, I work at, and obviously if your company is one of those companies that's been voted the best place to work, You would want to put that into your story, but not just that, but you'd want to tell a story of someone who has worked there for a while and why they love working there.
I can think of a good follow-up question to that too. What's some advice that you might give somebody who is a hiring manager, and so they have a departmental leadership, but they haven't created the company vision. They don't have the authority to tell the company story per se. What advice would you give them to still take away today's conversation and apply it?
Make it your own personal story. Here's my story of why I got into this business, whether it's, architecture, law, tech. But one of my favorite things about working here is the charity we do. I'm talking to a company that is in supplies for dentists, and they donate toothbrushes to children who need them. And to me, I care about children in the world. So that's part of the reason I love working here. So even if the company story is not promoting that big, tell why you love the company.
I love that. And there's nothing to stop you from creating your own little pieces and elements and implementing a good portion of that. Hey, maybe it'll work its way up the chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is an interesting comment. I think it kind of contains a bit of a question. He says, Dean Miles, he's an executive coach, says that a great story combines elements of planning and spontaneity. And I feel like there is a balance between those two things, isn't there? The spontaneity and planning. Talk to us about that. Is it a tension or is it a balance? Or give us your insights on that, if you would.
Compare yourself to an athlete or an actor. Right? Lots of rehearsal, lots of practice. And then where the real magic happens, if you listen to Meryl Streep or Al Pacino being interviewed, is they've done all the work. They know the lines. They know where they're supposed to go. And they have a framework. But every once in a while, they'll get an idea in that moment, or when they're in, or the other actor they're with will give them something unexpected, and they respond in that moment authentically. That's where the magic happens. So preparation and spontaneity are not enemies, but in fact, friends. And in order for spontaneity to really be great, all the basics have to be done in advance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Back to that preparation comment, giving you that confidence, you can kind of go with the flow, be creative when you put that work in.
Yes.
Here's a great one to share as well. Dennis Hamilton is asking, well, he's mentioned the same thing. Kind of, it's a comment that has a question in it. He said it helps him to think of these as like parables. Is that kind of what you mean by clear and concise? Expand on that if you would.
Sure. For me, especially as a kid, I would hear some parables and I'm like, I don't get it. I missed the point. Or it's
some are like the opposite almost.
It's not really clear. I mean, it's like very clever, but not really. Don't make us work that hard in the business world. Nobody's wants a word puzzle. So I tell everybody, speak at a 5th grade level. The Einstein quote, if you don't understand something really, you can't explain it simply. Right. And so you go on and on and on. So to make something clear with no acronyms, that's the first part. You don't have to be someone in artificial intelligence to understand what our company does in artificial intelligence, right? Sure. Those kinds of things. And the concise part is up to you in terms of, I could tell that story once and somebody could remember and repeat it. If not, it's probably not concise enough. And some of those parables can go on and on, if I remember correctly.
Some of them can. Depends on who's doing the telling. So it should be able to be remembered and retold by the listener. Is that the number one criterion you think?
That is my number. And here's why. Because no matter what you're selling, a product or a job, that person is probably going to discuss with someone else, a committee, their spouse, their friends. If you've told a story of what life is like to work here that is so compelling and clear that they can remember and repeat it, they're like, oh, great. So imagine you're Sally going home to her husband going, I met with these people and Mary seems really happy there. And he's like, well, really? You really want to change? I thought you were happy. Well, I'm not. But Mary, and he said, well, what's going on with Mary? And she goes, I don't remember, but she seemed happy. But if she's got the details, oh my God, Mary is using this new way of getting these listings and she's, got more time and now she's going to exercise and I want to go to exercise. she got the essence of that story because it's not that complicated and it's not that long. And
Hmm.
she needs to repeat it to other decision makers
Right. Right.
or co-decision makers in the case of a good marriage.
Exactly. In the case of a healthy marriage, co-decision maker. That's you get lots of additional free advice here on the
Yeah,
12 Sales
yes.
Leader. Everybody.
Like
Um,
a Lucy cartoon, The Doctor is in, right? Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So when you are when you're building something new, we have a lot of listeners here in the startup space.
Mhm.
A question's come to my mind. Obviously, it's going to be done a little bit differently. So you're probably primarily leaning on your own story to get the first few recruits coming in the door, right?
Oh, well, let me tell you, the number one criteria investors have when they're investing in a startup at any level is what is the team.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can't recruit the top team to work here, maybe for low money and high equity, or even join, they have lots of options,
Yeah.
then you aren't going to be persuasive enough to run the company. So
Yeah.
your first job as a tech startup founder is to recruit top people, which requires selling your vision, and it better be clear and concise and compelling, or because then people are like, I'm working for this tech startup. I don't really know what we do. I think we're disrupting blah, 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 but it's not really clear to me. It's like, what? Why'd you take that job? As
Yeah.
opposed to, I love what we're doing. We're disrupting HR and how people get reviews now because the old way doesn't work anymore and people really didn't tell the truth and blah, blah. Oh my God, that sounds great. I can understand the problem and you guys have a new solution to it. Oh, that's cool. Good for you. Right. Keep remembering we don't want any buyer's remorse when people take a job.
Right.
And it's one thing to recruit talent, it's another thing to keep them. That first 90 days must be laid out with someone as the mentor, check off points. You don't just throw someone to the wolves and go, good luck. That's another big part of the story of why you want to work here.
Well, yeah, like and describing the kind of support that's available there, that takes a lot of intentionality, sounds like, as well.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a question from Joshua: is storytelling a sort of a skill all of its own? And if so, what can you do to get better at it?
Well, the good news, Joshua, is that you don't have to be this gifted singer or athlete to become good at storytelling. As I said, what you can do to get better at it is use the 3 C's as your criteria, just the stories you've been telling, put them through that lens, get feedback, and then make sure the stories you're telling have all 4 parts, that you're not leaving off the special resolution part. Oh, I've
Hmm.
got everybody, imagine the Wizard of Oz ended when Dorothy got in the balloon, right? It's like, wait, no, she's at home and there's no place like home. Make sure your story has that. And when you do that, then the final really level that distinguishes you from being a good storyteller to a great storyteller is, did the person I told the story to see themselves in it?
Hmm.
Did I customize my story enough that they go, oh, that sounds like me? Because if that happens, then you don't have to push to close the sale. You literally just say, does that sound like the kind of journey you'd like to go on with me?
Hmm.
Yes, please.
Yeah. There you go. They've sold themselves. People
Exactly.
love to buy, hate to be sold, as good old Zig
Mm-hmm.
Ziglar used to say. So, when it comes to these sort of learning it as an art, is this something you recommend role playing, like with your team, perhaps? Like get your managers together and tell
Yes.
stories to one another and critique them?
I work with the teams all the time and I say, first of all, we're going to let go of being perfectionists in this.
Hmm.
And it's a safe space to make people feel safe to make a mistake and all that good stuff. And instead, we have coined the term be a progressionist.
Hmm.
We're wired to celebrate progress. That's why Fitbit works. Your video games, you're at the next level. So when I start having leaders open their weekly meetings, whether it's Monday or whatever day of the week it is, with what progress have we made? Let's go
Hmm.
around the room really quickly. Not
Hmm.
what sales have we closed,
Hmm.
because that's very black and white. And if you don't have a sale that closed that week, you feel bad. But I've made progress. I got an appointment with the VP. It's tomorrow, whatever it is, right? That is a mindset of celebrating and focusing on progress.
Hmm.
And then from there, break it down. Like I said, this week is all about story of origin. We need that for establishing rapport. We need that for networking events. Let's make sure we each have a good one and say it here in a safe space before we go out in the world and give each other feedback.
And I almost picture these on like note cards, each different type, and kind of really drilling them when you have off time,
Mhm.
right? Is that kind
Yep.
of yeah?
A few bullet points, boom, boom,
Hmm.
boom. What
Hmm.
it's all about. When I gave my TEDx talk, my TEDx coach said, we start at the end. We reverse engineer this. What do I want the audience to feel? What do I want them to think? And what do I want them to do?
Mm.
So if you use that criteria for your stories, all three, you're like, well, I would like people to remember what I do and why I do it,
Mm.
and be able to either hire me or send me referrals.
Mm.
But what I've said is so intriguing and unique that that's what I want people to feel. And they feel that my passion for it.
Mm.
Those kinds of things.
Well, I'm pretty confident that the listener feels like they got a ton of value out of the time spent with you today, John, and they have
Wonderful.
lots to think about, and we all want to go do what you've recommended today. Thanks once again for being an absolute rock star guest on the Evolve Sales Leader.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right, and to all of our listeners, thanks so much for making the show such a success. Without you, it wouldn't be possible, and we're here live every Friday afternoon. Come back and see us and bring a friend next time. We'll see you then. Thanks so much.